morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, friends and colleagues near and far. I hope you're well, safe, and sound wherever you are. Happy World Ocean Day, and thank you for making the time to join my Capstone project presentation. For this talk, I am going to give you an overview of my capstone work within the framework of my own personal career progress. My capstone project is titled Building the Pathway to Scale Marine Conservation Project. This is a case study of USAID Sea Project in West Papua Province, Indonesia. This is about the sustainability of marine conservation works, a subject that is close to my heart, and I am sure this is close to many of your hearts too. So, hold on, why is it not? Okay. Theory of change to creating an impactful project, I designed my capstone project based on these two statements. First, the mission is to sustain the change made by marine conservation projects, and it translates to the idea of marine conservation project implementers to learn how to persuade governments to adopt their program. The underlying issue is what Susanto in 2003 called the Sunset Project. And sadly enough, in 2021, this is still a relevant issue. So gains are lost because project inputs stop and people stop doing it. What worse is that people get tired of many projects and the dynamic upheaval. Non-government initiatives have short time frames and priorities change within time. So maybe for us, it's just a research or another project for 3 or 5 years. And we, foreign people from outside their communities, come and do stuff, but then we can move on and tell stories about it. But for the community, it is their lives. And project fatigue could create resistance in the community and rejection to future projects. I personally have worked with practitioners and helped them work with communities in the wetlands area in Sumatra that did not want any conservation projects because the previous project just stopped just as they were starting to get the hang of a new behavior and they were left confused of what to do next. We need to create sustainability beyond the project period. And we all understand that projects do have time frames, and therefore we need to involve the government, the party outside of the community that will be there for perpetuity. And to ensure that it lands wrong, the government needs to adopt or align it as their own program and have it planned and budgeted. So this was the approach I took, adapted from Chip and Dan Heath and from Sinner. I used the bright spot analysis to find what worked and how it could be replicated. I interviewed different stakeholders, which are the project implementers, governments from all levels, aside from the village, the district, the province, and the national level, and communities to find out which interventions worked or the bright spots. I triangulated the perception of and preferences between the planners, implementers, government, and beneficiaries, which is the community, and identified the bright spots and the underlying cause of it. Then summarize the common patterns for success and how it may be replicated by future projects to save time and money. This is my capstone project partner. Halfway through the first year, I reached out to USAID Sustainable Ecosystem Advanced or SEA project and was very grateful that the capstone project was in line with their work. The SEA project had 4 main focuses, which were marine spatial planning or MSP, marine protected areas or MPAs, sustainable fisheries, and law enforcement. And I was very lucky to have been an intern in the project and conduct my capstone project with them. So USAID has been working for a long time in Indonesia. The USAID Sea project itself is a 5-year project from 2016 to 2021 that supports the government of Indonesia to improve the governance of fisheries and marine resources and to conserve biological diversity. It targeted national, provincial, and local levels, with a focus on the provinces of West Papua, Maluku, and North Maluku that lie within the Indonesia's Fisheries Management Area 715. The red box over there, it's not quite a box, but it's easier to just acknowledge it that way. And it is a multi-million-dollar project, and also worked with many NGOs in its implementation. USAID project has now concluded and is rich in learnings, insights, and wisdom to help similar projects in the future. And this Capstone project provides an in-depth evaluation focusing on analyzing bright spots of government integration and seeks to use these bright spots to motivate wider government adoption of activities or programs initiated by the USAID project and build the pathway for scaling. And as a pilot effort, I focused on West Papua province. And for the community surveys and interviews, I focused on 8 villages in 2 districts, which is in Raja Ampat and South Sorong, and coordinated with RARE and WWF, who worked with the communities there. So these are where I pulled my data from. I conducted desk research from previous reports and attended and helped prepared 8 webinar series on lessons learned from USAID project. It was done in 4 weeks, 8 webinars, international webinars in 4 weeks. So it was very intense, very fun. And I also conducted interviews and community surveys. And due to COVID-19, I seek help from local enumerators because I could not go there, sadly, and ensure that the enumerators comply with all COVID-19 protocols in each interviews. For the interviews I conducted myself, I used Zoom. And to some point, because there isn't enough good internet connection, I used a WhatsApp in combination with a regular phone call, a cellular phone, because there was no connection there. So let's go to the finding highlights. From the interviews and surveys, I conclude that successful project implementation was perceived almost similarly by the 3 different stakeholders groups. A project is considered successful by them not only when the objectives are achieved, but also when the achieved objectives are maintained or when possible improved. But achieving success or identifying bright spots and government agencies planning and budgeting to sustain bright spot initiatives over the long term, apparently it's not enough according to them. And the important next step is actually to ensure that government agencies implement these plans and ensure that implementation aligns with the affected communities' desires and needs to protect their environments and natural resources. If the community doesn't want it or doesn't desire it, then anything that is already planned and budgeted is going futile. So all stakeholder groups consistently identified at least 4 bright spots despite using the different terms. These bright spots are marine spatial planning, marine protected areas, community or adat-based fisheries management, and community patrol. In terms of MSP, it is mandatory for every province. Despite being mandatory, West Papua province struggled with the process and technicalities of it. The USAID project facilitated the MSP from 2018 to 2020 and really accelerated the process, where the MSP for 2019 to 2039 was established in a provincial regulation. And through this regulation, all plans related to coastal management are planned and budgeted for. As for the MPA, the communities not necessarily mention it as the MPA. They call it a protection area, protect the sea, but it's basically the MPA initiative. And declaring itself as a conservation province in 2015, West Papua is actually one of the provinces with the highest MPA cover in Indonesia, with over 4.1 million hectares of MPA, which contributes to almost 18% to Indonesia's total MPA. The province is planning to establish more MPAs with sustainable financing mechanisms. And although everything is still in process, especially the sustainable financing mechanism, the USAID project facilitated the initiatives, and thanks to collaborative efforts of all stakeholders, all MPAs, including those that are not yet established, are already included in the marine spatial planning, and therefore the MPAs are spatially secured, and room for budgeting the MPA establishment is in place. As for community or adat-based fisheries management, integrating co-management with communities is really the key in achieving effective management of MPAs, and communities perceive this initiative suitable with their needs and desire to protect the natural resources that are important for their lives. And therefore, in early 2020, 7 villages in Raja Ampat district signed a joint head of village regulation on adat-based fisheries management in their respective and common waters within the Dampier Strait MPA. And for community patrol is one of the hearts of USAID project's 4 main focus, which is law enforcement. And community patrol also came up in the interview and surveys as part of MPAs and fisheries management. And although there is no policy established at the provincial or district or village level for community patrol in particular, the existing policies at national level actually could be optimized as the umbrella for community patrol. This is taking into account the needs for institutional empowerment at provincial and village level to plan and allocate resources based on the existing regulations. And while bright spots were identified, there was also a consistent message about the importance of approach and process for the bright spots to happen. One of the interviewees mentioned that everyone was very suspicious about the marine spatial planning at first, and it was a very painful process just trying to explain what it was. But once the stakeholders understood what it means for them, they go all out and beyond expectations. So speaking about the process and timing were one of the enabling factors for bright spots along with the others. So hold on. I conclude there are several enabling factors for bright spots. The first one is process and timing. The process towards achieving the goals was key to the goal achievements, involving and engaging stakeholders during MSP, MPA, and community or adat-based fisheries management was the longest process, but at the same time, the biggest reason for success. High community involvement and engagement throughout the project also contributed to the high bright spots identification. And most implementing partners also have worked in West Papua for at least 5 years, if not more. Then the bright spots are inseparable from the foundational work of the implementing partners prior to the USAID project period. Also, communities' trust to implementing partners were among other factors enabling bright spots, and it was gained through years of process with the community. So the process and approach is very critical. And for a program to be included in the government's planning and budgeting, the timing in which it aligns with the government planning cycle is critical also. Missing the planning cycle would require the planning to shift to the next year for implementation in the following year. So missing one cycle means 2 years of loss of work. The second enabling factors for bright spot is co-planning and co-management, co-planning and co-implementing. So for government to continue programs initiated or facilitated by non-government entities, it is important to engage them from the planning phase to the implementation and all the way to monitoring and evaluation. So there should be sort of like a room for co-planning, not just coming there with a clear and concise timeline and what to do, but also give some room for co-planning with them. And the correct government agency to engage here in this process is the technical agency, the term that we use in Indonesia, or the Marine and Fisheries Office at provincial and district level. And according to the government representatives I spoke to, their early involvement would enable them to understand the project better and implement it more effectively with their non-government partners. It would also enable them to explain the project more clearly to their supervisors, to the head of districts or head of provinces. And since planning and budgeting involves multiple government agencies, it is also important to involve other government agencies through the technical agencies. So not going to, like, for example, the planning agency directly, but going through the technical agency to go through them. So it is could align their priorities and also avoid cross-sectoral conflict, which is often happen. And the third one is catalytic funding. There were times actually when government funding was not readily available and required time for the administration process. And this meant that critical meetings could not be conducted at a critical time. At such times, the government needs catalytic funding to maintain the momentum, and particularly when dealing with tight deadlines such as MSP process or dealing with communities where delay may cause them to lose trust. With clear guidelines and relevance towards achieving goals, the USAID project was a provided catalytic funding for many of such moments. And last but not least, to focus on institutional empowerment. In engaging with communities and governments, the project taught us to focus on institutional empowerment. A personal approach such as talking or working with community leaders or government officials is used as a lever to empower the communities and governments institutions. By engaging them in the project design and implementation, they learn firsthand about the things that matter to them. It could also help them to build their capacity for self-organization, including fisheries management, catch reporting, patrolling, and others. And they become the real subject in the issues that concern them. So from the bright spots in the USAID project, I summarized the pathway to scale marine conservation projects through government adoption in a Doppler effect model. Non-government initiatives undoubtedly could create change. However, government adoption of the initiative could sustain and scale up the change to become a new norm that is adopted by the community. Only then can the desired conservation goal be achieved. In doing so, non-government initiatives should provide room for adjustments in their planning and implementation and accommodate government's inputs and communities' desire to protect their natural resources. Government understanding of the initiative would allow them to easily integrate it with their priorities during annual planning and budgeting. NGOs or projects must also communicate consistently and clearly and live up to values of honesty and transparency throughout and beyond the project. This is also a consistent message that I receive during the interviews. So the Capstone project has ended, but its values and the message will not stop here. In fact, I am continuing right now by working at Digdaya Cita Selaras, a national consulting company focusing on personal and institutional development, particularly in the environment sector. I am working, excuse me. I am working as their partnership and network development specialist. And the good news is that my research is timely as there is the Indonesia Marine Funders collaboration through Blue-Green advisors trying to synergize the work of NGOs they are supporting and build a learning network of NGOs to create a safe space for them to share their bright spots and even dark spots without any judgment. I believe this will contribute to the mission and big idea I've mentioned earlier to sustain the change initiated by non-government initiatives. Last but not least, I would like to acknowledge my advisors who have helped me tremendously along this journey. Professor Ann Kapaczynski and Dr. Elena Finkbeiner, thank you for your kindness and support. Also, Dr. Ellen White and Dr. Tina Gunawan, my Capstone project partners and mentors, thank you for your continuous support and for believing my Capstone project since day one. I also want to thank to the many organizations that have supported me in the master's journey. UCSC CSP program, USAID project, UCSC Service for Transfer and Reentry Students, and UCSC Center for Southeast Asian Coastal Interactions. And also thank you to the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries, the provincial government of West Papua, the district government of Raja Ampat, Rare Indonesia, WWF Indonesia, CI Indonesia, and the University of Papua for patiently answering my questions and extremely supportive in my Capstone project process. Thank you all and happy to answer any questions.